Hey folks, it's Ryan 2 months into the future. If you have any thoughts, theories, or opinions on the film, or have a request or recommendation for a future video, please make sure to leave it with me in the comments below. Enjoy the video.
It's going to be fine. Breathe like me.
Julien Maury and Alexandre Bastillo's 2021 French supernatural horror The Deep House is an ambitiously high-concept take on the classical haunted house story, in that it takes place entirely underwater. What you're seeing is not CGI or green screen, because as immense purveyors of genre practical effects, most prolifically demonstrated in their harrowing 2007 new French extremity home invasion horror Inside, Maury and Bastillo are always devoted to unflinching authenticity. The Deep House tells the story of a couple called Ben and Tina, who travel to a remote area of southwest France and learn of a mysterious village submerged at the bottom of a lake after it was flooded decades prior. However, after diving deep and discovering a suspiciously all too well preserved house, it becomes apparent that unnatural forces are at play, as the couple soon find themselves trapped inside and pursued by restless spirits. At barely 80 minutes long, The Deep House isn't a particularly deep film, no pun intended, but if you're predisposed to fears of the deep, darkness, drowning, and well, travel vloggers, there's a fair bit to take home from it if you set your expectations accordingly. Not to sound reductive, but the film relies wholly on its gimmick for originality, because once you take away its underwater conceit, you'll be left with a rather underwhelming ghost story that's kept afloat by masterfully suffocating suspense and strong technical prowess. The reason I sound quite negative here is because while I'm often forgiving of most horror mystery payoffs, especially when they take massive swings, this is one of those cases where the reveal is just so painfully pedestrian and uninspired that it craters under the weight of expectation shown in its genuinely excellent first hour. So for those still curious, brace yourself. The Deep House opens by establishing its format of intercutting between found footage and cinematic third person as we're planted into the shoes of our two urban exploring YouTubers. Now, I have to acknowledge here that while I previously pointed fingers at other found footage films for being non-committal and flip-flopping with the format because I'm a shameless nitpicky purist for the subgenre, I can easily forgive The Deep House due to its immensely complex and challenging production. Maury and Bastillo explain to Dead Central that the choice to juxtapose between formats was for both dramatic and practical purposes. Not only does it help reinforce palpable verisimilitude to sell the fact that we are literally underwater and experiencing every intimate stress, anxiety, and fascination for its richly decorated setting, but it allows the film to sustain a clear orientation so we can immerse ourselves in everything on display. It's notable that the filmmakers demonstrate tremendous confidence in their craft, because they could have taken the cheap and easy way out by using chaotic shaky cam and justifying it as realistic for the found footage format, but instead they respect the audience and are mindful of the fact that the environment is fundamentally paramount to the horror and atmosphere. I just have to single out praise for the filmmakers for actually walking the walk. They don't cower away from their own set challenge, despite how increasingly expensive it was to make the film. Speaking with Variety, Maury and Bastillo admitted that due to COVID lockdown occurring in the middle of production in 2020, the budget eventually skyrocketed from 300k to 5 million euros. The way filming worked is that they built the entire set on a studio grid and simply lowered it in and out of water for a limited time each day so as to not damage the meticulous mise-en-scene. And even more strikingly, to really enhance that authenticity, the duo told Bloody Disgusting that the eventual paranormal corpses, including the little girl, were played by real experienced freedivers, so they didn't need to add many effects in post-production. I'm saying all of this just to compound how unbelievably impressive the film is at making the atmosphere as naturalistic as possible, even if it does deliberately lean into classical haunted house tropes like uncanny porcelain dolls and occult iconography, which, as you'll see, eventually explains my biggest gripe with the film. Anyway, before we get our toes wet, the opening sees Ben and Tina exploring an abandoned sanitarium in Ukraine that closed down in the 1970s after 7 children were murdered with poison by a nurse. You don't need to know this detail specifically, but it does serve as a taster to not only blatantly foreshadow exactly where the story ends up going, but to convey the underlying tension between the couple, as Ben is selfishly motivated by going viral, while Tina attempts to be the voice of reason in trying to get him to actually enjoy the time they spend together. The thing about Ben is that he seems like a far less curious person than his vivid research background into the obscure and abnormal would have you believe. His passion for travel and adventure is contrary to his motive. Tina keeps reminding him of the privilege they have to be going on all these exotic escapades, but he's sort of ignorant and bitterly dismissive about it. He doesn't seem to take anything in unless it helps him gain precious views, blinding him to how taken for granted his life has become. None of this setup ends up going anywhere, but I really liked what the story was initially trying to insinuate with his character, mainly because as a YouTuber myself, also fixated on performance, I can often relate. Oh, that reminds me, remember to comment, subscribe, and commit war crimes to that like button. In fact, just for comparison, Ben partially reminded me of a far less interesting version of both Scarlett from As Above So Below and Joyce Reardon from Rose Red. The three works do share loose similarities, particularly in the ever-changing labyrinth design of their settings, and how their protagonist's egotistical obsession with digging deeper into the evil sets up their own poetic downfalls. Granted, those other two examples do have more going on. Unfortunately, The Deep House does not fulfill that same thematic potential to see Ben grow obsessed with the house. I appreciate the tension and sadness it gives to his relationship with Tina, but it ultimately fizzles out once the film really gets going. Now, one last tangent surface detail I want to highlight is the town they first arrive in, because knowing that COVID hit during production, the stark contrast between the eerie, empty streets and discovering that the initial location they were searching for is actually a popular tourist trap hits a bit differently in the era of isolation. I can't fully explain it, but there was this disquieting sensation that lingered in the back of my mind long before alarm bells were actually triggered when the couple meets a mysterious local called Pierre who tells them about the underwater village. Look, if you have seen any oblivious tourist trap horror in your life, like Hostel, The Ruins, Touristas, and Old, you'll see through the facade immediately. It's emblematic of how the film begins to suffer narratively. It's as subtle as the way I say however, and hell, even Pierre basically says as much. Once underwater, the couple communicate via microphones in their masks, as the film admirably tries to emphasize natural diegesis over artificial sound and music cues to further sustain that believability. At times, it's edited in such a way that the montage feels like one of Ben's actual professional YouTube videos. Now, as I said in the beginning, if you're predisposed to thalassophobia and claustrophobia, the film is going to get under your skin far more than others, because the cinematography does an impressive job at making you feel consumed by this deep, inescapable void as they venture into the ghoulish unknown. You know the scene in Titanic where they find the ship in the present day using a drone? Imagine that vibe for an entire film. It's basically James Cameron's The Abyss, but minus the massive budget behind it. It isn't going to work for everybody, but it's certainly a compelling way to frame such a classic genre. It's inherently otherworldly and compounded by the constant urgency that the couple have limited oxygen. I mean, if some ghostly demonic monster doesn't get them, fucking nature will. Fitting to Mori and Bastillo's other work, there is actually a tinge of voyeurism added, quite blatantly in fact, through Ben's drone camera Tom, literally named after Peeping Tom, which later begins to illuminate red as the horrors intensify, as if symbolizing some demonic snuff film. It cannot be understated how crucial the wide shots are to keeping you engaged, because your eyes are always surveying everything on display, just looking for a physical reason for the characters to bail out of there. However, what truly becomes noticeable is how the deeper they go into the surviving house, the more unnatural its all too perfectly well-preserved presence begins to feel. The couple are all too late to acknowledge it, but you'll start to see modern items littered all over the house, as if someone is living there and keeping a collection left by former divers, or dare I say victims, because as expected, it all all comes to head when the couple enter the basement that's barricaded by a massive fucking crucifix that screams everything we need to know. Either they've entered hell or they've unleashed it, because what they discover is a satanic symbol marked on the floor and two bloated corpses chained up with brutal masks over their faces staring directly into it. It's here where the couple finally realize how off the preservation was. The bodies should be bones by this point, but they look relatively recent, prompting the suspicion that the couple were lured there by Pierre and are perhaps destined to meet the same fate as this couple. In typical haunted house fashion, they discover their exit blocked, evidence of other divers having experienced the same ordeal, and ambiguity over what each character is experiencing as Tina begins to seemingly hallucinate, only for the real nightmare fuel to occur when the two corpses suddenly begin pursuing the couple around the house. Seriously, when this jarring visual got scorched into my psyche, I told the film to fuck off. The couple end up separated after trying to escape up a collapsing chimney, to which Ben conveniently learns from a family tree that Pierre was in fact the son of the two corpses, who of course own this house. Not long after, Tina finds Ben Blair Witch style after he's very evidently possessed by the daughter of the house, as he villainously taunts Tina to swallow a strange worm that's gotten inside her suit. Now, as you could probably guess by this point, it's here in the last 10 or so minutes where everything just fell apart for me. Not only is Ben's delivery just too camp and cartoonish for my liking, as he tells Tina to join us, we belong here, everything will be okay, detracting from the persistently brooding tone up to this point, but he then proceeds to give Tina a literal video presentation explaining exactly what's going on. Talk about giving us a home lecture as our exposition dump. The gist of it is that a teenage Pierre and his father kidnapped and sacrificed children from the village until the locals one day sought vengeance by killing their daughter and stringing up the parents as punishment, while Pierre managed to escape. Ever since, it's obviously apparent Pierre has been luring in more victims as sacrifices because Satan, I guess? I actually think the movie would have worked better if it just did not explain any of this, because now I have many annoying questions. Look, I can respect that the film has a vision and it commits to it, but be honest with me in the comments. Was there anyone else here expecting Cthulhu to show up? Now, I'm not saying I could write a better script, God forbid, but my imagination early on had conjured this Lovecraftian cosmic horror theory about replacing fresh sacrifices regularly to keep some incomprehensible eldritch evil at bay after it consumed the town or whatever. All due respect, maybe it's just overexposure at this point, but for something so alluringly abyssal, the devil seems a bit too basic bitch for a setting like this. I guess in a way my criticism echoes what people didn't like about Longlegs. I get that many people have strong ties to the devil in their own belief systems, but for me, what ultimately prevents The Deep House from elevating beyond a decent ghost story, not that I'm taking away from what it does so well, is that it lacks that grander reach into the unknown. Just for comparison, I'm going to spoil the film Underwater for a second. If you don't want that spoiled, jump to here, it's on screen now so that you can avoid that spoiler completely. It's an okay creature feature set in a deep sea mining rig. But what elevates that film in my mind, besides Christian Stewart's compellingly existentially depressed protagonist, is that it eventually pays off with this utterly unreal deep sea giganticism that perfectly taps into everything horrifying about the deep dark abyss. Instead, The Deep House ends pretty abruptly, with Ben getting stabbed by the daughter spirit and Tina escaping only to lose her oxygen tank and struggling to the surface, before finally, in classical French nihilism, unceremoniously drowning. I will say that's a gut punch I like, because the fact her body doesn't even resurface cements a fitting bleakness as the after credits show another pair destined to meet the same fate. Again, I don't want to take away from what the film does so well. It is remarkably suspenseful in places, and there are many strong visuals to appreciate, but it's simply dragged down in the end by the weakness of its story. So until next time, stay safe, stay away from the French abyss, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.